They're throwing us out of our homes, Elena cried. Her voice, usually a soft murmur of comfort, now rose like a war bugle in the Plaza del Sol. Her dark eyes, normally filled with the tenderness of one who has seen much of life, now blazed with a steely determination, reflecting the outrage of an entire neighborhood. The crumpled paper she held in her hand, an eviction notice bearing the cold seal of Montalvo Investments, seemed to burn her skin. The crowd of neighbors, men and women of all ages, but especially many with silver hair, surrounded her, their faces etched with anguish and uncertainty. The morning sun bathed the square, but a dark shadow of fear and desperation had fallen over La Esperanza. The shock wave of her cry reverberated off the colorful facades of the humble homes that lined the square. The elders, many of them seated on wooden benches under the shade of an old tree, flinched. Some coughed nervously, others looked to Elena as if she alone could dispel the evil omen. It says we have 30 days, added a neighbor, Don Pepe, his voice breaking as he held up his own identical document. 30 days to abandon the homes where they had been born, raised their children, and buried their loved ones. 30 days to rip out the roots that had anchored them to this land for generations. It was not a notification, it was a sentence, a cruel condemnation for those who had nowhere else to go. Elena, the woman who had been the community's pillar since her mother's passing, clenched her fists. She was not Paul a lawyer or a politician, just a weaver of dreams and threads, a woman with calloused hands and a noble heart who had always found solutions, big or small, for her neighbors' problems. But this time, the threat seemed monolithic, unbreakable, as solid as the skyscrapers Montalvo Investments promised to build in place of their homes. We cannot just stand by and do nothing, she said, her gaze sweeping over each fearful face, trying to ignite a spark of resistance where only the ashes of despair remained. She knew the first step was to instill in them the courage to fight. Doña Carmen, the neighborhood matriarch in her 80s with hair as white as winter snow, rose with difficulty, leaning on her cane. Her eyes, clouded by time but still sharp, met Elena's. My grandmother was born here, Elena, she whispered, her voice heavy with the history of a century. I buried my husband here. Where are we to go? To sleep under a bridge, like the homeless? Her question hung in the silence, an echo of the uncertainty gnawing at every person present. La Esperanza was more than a collection of houses. It was an extended family, a nest of memories, and a promise of continuity for future generations. Now, it was brutally threatened by ambition. Behind that cruel notice was the name Ricardo Montalvo, the real estate magnate whose empire was built on the ruins of other people's dreams. His reputation preceded him, a ruthless, unscrupulous businessman whose unofficial motto was, everything has a price, and if it doesn't, we'll put one on it. To him, the La Esperanza neighborhood was not a home for hundreds of souls, but a valuable plot of land in a strategic location. A diamond in the rough that he intended to polish and sell to the highest bidder, regardless of the lives he trampled in the process. His name was synonymous with luxury and power, but also with a soulless coldness. Elena knew this fight would not be easy. There were whispers in the local papers, largely controlled by Montalvo's tentacles, that La Esperanza was a blight, an unsanitary slum that needed to be modernized for the good of the city. Blatant lies, of course, but they sowed doubt in the public mind, preparing the ground to justify the barbarity. This was not just a battle for land, it was a war for dignity, for truth, for the memory of those who had built this neighborhood with their own hands and sweat. The scales of justice seemed to tilt dangerously toward the power of money, threatening to crush their struggle. "We cannot give in, neighbors," Elena exclaimed, her voice taking on a firmness that surprised even herself. "If we leave, we will lose more than our homes. We will lose our history, our identity. This land is ours by right, by the years of work and love we have poured into it." Her gaze fell on an old wooden bench where her father had taught her to read, then on the small kiosk of Don Emilio, the baker, who had been serving daily bread for over 50 years. Every corner of this neighborhood was an open book of memories, an intangible treasure that Montalvo's greed could neither buy nor destroy. Don Pepe, with a trembling hand, tried to hold back tears. "But what can we do, Elena? He has lawyers, influence. We only have our empty hands and hearts heavy with fear." The desperation was palpable, a heavy cloak threatening to smother any attempt at resistance. What do we do? That question, repeated in murmurs, floated in the air like a lament. Elena looked at him intently. First, we don't lose faith. Second, we unite like a single fist. And third, we search for the truth. There is always a truth hidden behind so much ambition, don't you think? Some secret the powerful are trying to bury. Her conviction was a beacon. Despair threatened to spread like a plague, but Elena would not let fear paralyze her people. She looked into the eyes of Doña Carmen, of Don Pepe, of every single one of them, and offered them the only weapon they possessed: unity and a voice. "Do you think we are alone?" she asked, her voice soft yet sharp enough to cut the air. "We are not. Justice, true justice, still exists. Our cry, if it is loud enough, will reach ears willing to listen." That same afternoon, Elena called a meeting at the 1929 Community Center, a small hall typically used for birthday parties and sewing classes. The plastic chairs filled quickly, and many had to stand, packed tightly together, but united by a common fate. The atmosphere was tense, heavy, but Elena's determination was a contagious engine driving everyone's will. "We've reviewed the papers," announced Don Pepe, a former accountant, his glasses slipping down his nose. "These documents are valid, legal. There are no mistakes. But something bothers me. The haste. The way they've managed all this, it smells of desperation, as if they want to hide something before anyone can find it." His comment lit a small flame. "Desperation? Why?" asked a young woman, Lucia, the neighborhood school teacher, with the perceptive gaze of one who never takes things at face value. "Montalvo doesn't lack money or time. Why the urgency to evict us? Is there something more than the value of the land? Some secret this ground holds, buried under years of history?" Her question hung in the air, an echo of the intuition Elena already felt in her heart. Years ago, there had been rumors of old land grant pacts, documents forgotten in some dusty archive, but no one had ever paid them any mind. Now, those old tales seemed to take on a new, alarming relevance. one that could change everything. Elena nodded slowly. Exactly, Lucia. That's the question we must answer. My grandfather used to talk about an old contract from when the neighborhood was founded, which guaranteed that this land could never be sold for commercial purposes, only for the homes of the workers who built it and their descendants. It was an almost legendary story in La Esperanza, from a time when their ancestors had arrived with the promise of a future. Our first task will be to unearth that truth, whatever it is. We will search every corner, ask the oldest among us. We will review every document, no matter how old. Every piece could be vital, a part of the puzzle. While in La Esperanza, hope clung to old stories and dusty papers, miles away. In his panoramic office, overlooking the Akir city, Ricardo Montalvo sipped an exotic espresso. The polished mahogany desk was clear of papers, a testament to the efficient team that handled the details. The La Esperanza neighborhood, he commented to his assistant, a young and ambitious woman. Make sure the eviction process proceeds without any setbacks. I don't want any scandals. This is a crucial project for our luxury portfolio. Understood? His tone was icy, devoid of any emotion, as if he were discussing the demolition of a lifeless anthill. The assistant, Sophia, nodded, her face impassive, her movements mechanical. She had worked for Montalvo for years and had learned not to question, only to execute. For Montalvo, the lives of those people were mere obstacles on the path to building a luxury apartment complex and an exclusive shopping center. He didn't see faces. He didn't hear stories. He only saw figures on a balance sheet and an expansion plan. The idea that this neighborhood could harbor some legal or sentimental secret that could stop him was a mockery of his absolute control over reality and his invincible power. His ego was as vast as his fortune. Back in La Esperanza, the search for documents began with renewed energy, though tinged with the anxiety of their limited time. Children, oblivious to the full gravity of the situation, helped their grandparents rummage through old trunks, looking for old letters or any paper that might seem important. Elena organized the searches, assigning teams and drawing a mental map of the oldest houses where the memory of years had accumulated in every corner, waiting to be discovered. It was a race against the clock, against bureaucracy, and above all, against the implacable will of a powerful man. Days turned into a week, and though countless memories, faded photographs, and old love letters were found, the key contract, the founding document, remained elusive, like a ghost from the past. Frustration began to creep in, threatening to extinguish the spark of hope they had worked so hard to ignite. Doña Carmen, sitting in her rocking chair with a photo album in her hands, sighed. My father used to say that the big paper was kept by the founder's family, the Heredias. But they left many years ago, moved to the countryside. Nobody knows where they are now. A faint clue, almost a whisper from the past. But for Elena, every word was a lifeline. A knot formed in Elena's stomach. The Heredia family. She had heard the name, like a local legend, but had never given it the importance it now deserved. It doesn't matter how far away they are, Doña Carmen, she said, her voice firm despite the pang of desperation she felt. If a document exists that proves we are right, we will find it. And if the Heredias hold the key, then we will go find them, to the ends of the earth if we have to. While Elena and her neighbors clung to that thin thread of hope, Montalvo prepared his next move, oblivious to the tenacity of those he considered insignificant. His lawyers had already filed for an early demolition permit, arguing the imminent decay and lack of habitability of the neighborhood's structures, a dirty strategy to apply pressure and speed up the evictions. Montalvo's legal and media machine was in full operation, suffocating any possible resistance before it could take root. The news of the early demolition request, leaked by a sympathetic city hall employee, hit La Esperanza like a devastating new blow. Panic began to spread. Some neighbors, the most vulnerable, began to talk of resignation, of seeking refuge with distant relatives or in homeless shelters. The conversations in the plaza grew somber, the murmurs of hope drowned out by whispers of defeat. "They're cornering us, Elena," said Don Pepe, his eyes now filled with a deep, unshakable sadness. "I don't know how much more we can take. This is a war we cannot win." But Elena refused to surrender. For her, every defeated face was another reason to fight. Every tear, a promise not to yield. "Don Pepe, do you think my grandfather or your father would have abandoned this land without fighting to their last breath?" she asked, trying to ignite their ancestral pride. "Our roots run deeper than their luxury foundations. We will find the Heredias. We will find that contract. And if Montalvo wants a war, we will give him the fight of his life. There is no amount of money in the world that can buy the dignity of a united people." Her voice, though weary, was still a beacon. Night fell over La Esperanza, bringing with it the cool scent of damp earth and the heavy burden of uncertainty. Elena, unable to sleep, replayed every detail, every conversation in her mind, searching for the missing link. Suddenly, a fleeting image flashed through her memory, a picture from an old family album. A chance remark from her grandmother about a distant cousin of the Heredia family who had moved to a small farming town to the south ignited in her mind like a flash of lightning. It was a fragile clue, almost insignificant, but it was the only one they had, the single thread to which they could desperately cling. As the first ray of sunlight crested the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold, Elena rose with a new, steely determination. The road ahead would be long and arduous, filled with obstacles she could barely imagine. But the truth, she knew, always finds its way, like water, carving through the hardest rock. What she would discover at the dawn of this quest for the Heredias and their ancient document would not only change the fate de La Esperanza, but would also unveil the true dark nature of Montalvo investments, a truth the magnate had buried beneath layers of lies and corruption. But would she be in time to unearth it before everything was lost forever? Elena wasted not a second. As the sun climbed, draping the sky in promises still uncertain, she was already consulting the oldest residents, those who held the oral history of the neighborhood in their memories like an invaluable treasure. The lead on the Heredias, however faint, was their only hope, the lifeline she clung to with the strength of one who has seen her people on the brink of an abyss. "My grandfather used to say they went toward the olive lands, to the south," remarked Don Ramon, the old watchmaker, his voice as raspy as sandpaper. "They had relatives in a village called Valle Escondido, Hidden Valley. I don't know if it even exists anymore, but if anyone knows about roots, It's the farmers. Each fragment of information was vital, an Ariadne's thread in a labyrinth of despair, a small beacon of light. With the name Valle Escondido echoing in her mind like a distant melody, Elena quickly organized a small party. Don Pepe, with his sharp mind for numbers and an old map of the country, offered to accompany her, sensing his experience could be useful in deciphering documents or routes. Lucia, the schoolteacher, also wished to join, her youth and energy a necessary counterpoint to the gravity of the mission, a breath of fresh air in the suffocating uncertainty. Every minute counts, Elena affirmed, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if she could already see their final destination, the exact point where the truth would be revealed. We cannot let Montalvo win this race. The future of La Esperanza depends on this journey, on every step we take, on every door we knock, regardless of fatigue or doubt. The journey was long and exhausting, an odyssey across back roads, forgotten towns, and infinite fields of olive trees that vanished into the horizon under a relentless sun. Don Pepe's old car, which had seen better days, rattled on without cease. But they did not stop. At every roadside inn, at every small market, Elena would ask, a faded photograph of a young Heredia in her hand, searching for a sign, a trail that would lead them to the right place. The people, reserved at first, opened up when they saw the honesty and desperation in her eyes, offering small pieces of a puzzle that slowly began to take shape. Some Heredias lived around here many years ago, an old woman told them, in a village called La Encina, her face weathered by the sun. She pointed a trembling finger toward the mountains. They went further inland, where the land is more fertile. They said they had a very old olive mill, one that fed several generations. They were people of honor, the kind who keep their word, who don't forget their promises. If, if you're looking for something old and valuable, they would have kept it safe, like a treasure passed from father to son. The direction was vague, but hope surged anew in Elena's chest. Her heart leaped at the thought that they were close, just one step away from finding the truth, or at least from drawing nearer to it. Finally, after days of relentless searching, they arrived at a small hamlet hidden between hills, where an old olive mill, its sails frozen by time, stood like a monument to the past. An elderly man, his hands calloused from working the earth and wisdom in his eyes, received them with caution. He was Mateo Heredia, the last of the founder's direct line. His home, modest but steeped in history, smelled of old wood and bygone memories. I wasn't expecting visitors, he said, in a measured voice, observing them with a mixture of curiosity and distrust, the kind of suspicion that time often bestows upon the solitary. The tension was palpable, as if the fate of La Esperanza hinged on his next word. Elena explained their situation with a passion that sprang from the depths of her soul. She told him the story of La Esperanza, of Montalvo's threat, of the desperate search for the contract that could save them. Mateo listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, staining the sky in hues of orange and purple, like a painter bidding farewell to the day. My grandfather always spoke of a pact, he finally confessed, his voice barely a whisper on the wind, an agreement that guaranteed the lands to the workers. He called it the paper of honor, said it was more valuable than any fortune. A spark of hope, faint but real, ignited in Elena's heart. "Do you know where that document is, Senor Heredia?" she asked, her voice thick with a mix of reverence and urgency, each syllable trembling with the weight of the question. "It could save our home, our history. It's the only proof that those lands belong to us by right, not just by custom or the years we've lived there, but by a written commitment." Mateo sighed, the weight of generations on his shoulders, the responsibility of an ancestral oath. "Yes, I know," he answered, his gaze lost in the distance, in a past that seemed to spring to life. "My father hid it well, in a safe place, far from prying eyes. He believed that one day, when the greed of men grew too great, it would be needed. But finding it will not be easy. It must be earned. You must prove you are fighting for what is just." Mateo led them to an old barn, dusty and dark, filled with farming tools and the scent of damp earth, the smell of rural life. There, behind a stack of grain sacks and beneath a loose flagstone, they found an ancient wooden box, carefully sealed, as if guarding a centuries-old secret. Upon opening it, they revealed a parchment, yellowed with age, bearing a seal and an elaborate script that spoke to the importance of its contents. It was the foundational contract, the pact of hope, as they would come to call it. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. It was here, in her hands, the hidden truth that Montalvo had tried to bury beneath his boundless ambition and insatiable greed. The document, though old and fragile, was clear. It stipulated that the lands of La Esperanza had been ceded in perpetuity to the workers and their descendants, on the condition that they be used only for dignified housing and community purposes, explicitly forbidding any commercial or speculative use, any attempt at profit. The founder's signature, alongside that of a notary from the era, attested to its authenticity, confirming its validity and undeniable historical weight. Joy and relief washed over Elena. They had the proof, the legal foundation to defend their home, but a crucial step remained: to make that document stand against Montalvo's relentless machine, where paper was not always enough, and justice could be bent. "This is our weapon," Elena said, her eyes shining with emotion and renewed determination as they journeyed back to La Esperanza, the parchment carefully guarded. "Our voice, our shield. This paper is justice made manifest, the irrefutable proof of what we have always known in our hearts." Don Pepe examined it through his spectacles, confirming its legal validity and the clarity of its clauses, his face lit with hope. Lucia could not hold back tears of relief, imagining a future where the children in her school would not have to abandon their homes. Does this story move you? Stay with us, for the story of hope is far from over. Hope must never die, and the truth will always find its way into the light, to be heard by all who believe in justice and human dignity. Meanwhile, in the city, Montalvo's machine churned on, oblivious to the small victory in La Esperanza. Ricardo, seated in his luxurious office, received daily reports, monitoring every move, every detail of his plan. "The evictions are proceeding, sir," his assistant Sophia informed him, her voice cold and distant, devoid of any emotion. "Some residents are already looking for alternatives. The organized resistance appears to be weakening, losing steam." Montalvo smiled, a glacial gesture that did not reach his eyes, a smirk of premature victory. "Perfect. I want you to accelerate the process. We cannot allow any disruptive elements to slow us down. Once the demolition begins, the rest will fall under their own weight. No one will dare stand in the way of a project already underway. His confidence was unshakable. His faith in the power of money absolute. What Montalvo did not know was that hope, far from weakening, had found a new reason to fight, a reason to rise up stronger than before. Upon their return, Elena and her companions were received as heroes. The news of the discovery of the Pact of Hope spread like wildfire, rekindling the neighborhood's morale, breathing new life into their hearts. Faces that were once downcast filled with a new light, the spark of resistance now burning brighter than ever, a flame that promised not to be extinguished. "We have it," Elena exclaimed, holding the parchment up for the crowd gathered in the square, her words ringing with the force of a fulfilled promise. "We have the proof, neighbors, the paper that says this land is ours. They will not move us." The news reached Montalvo through one of his lawyers, who had heard whispers in the courthouse hallways. At first, he dismissed it as an old wives' tale, a desperate strategy by people with no resources, grasping at straws. "An old piece of paper is no match for my empire," he snarled, slamming his fist on the table, his voice dripping with contempt. "It has no legal validity today. It is a relic of the past that has no place in the present." Nevertheless, a seed of unease was planted in his mind, small but persistent. Ricardo could not afford any setbacks, especially one that could tarnish his reputation as an invincible businessman. Frustration began to brew, a tiny crack in his armor, threatening to spread. He ordered his lawyers to investigate the alleged document with the utmost urgency. The initial report, while downplaying its importance with a condescending tone, could not deny its authenticity or its historical relevance. This infuriated Montalvo. "This is a farce, a mockery," he exclaimed in a tense meeting with his legal team, his eyes bloodshot. "I want you to discredit that document. Find any legal loophole to nullify it. Use all of our resources. Spare no expense. I don't want that paper to see the light of day in any court. My reputation is at stake, and with it, millions of euros. I will not be stopped by a group of old folks and a piece of parchment." His lawyers set to work, searching for flaws, ambiguous interpretations, or any technicality that could invalidate the pact. Meanwhile, the pressure on La Esperanza intensified mercilessly. The evictions already underway were accelerated, and Montalvo's company began sending demolition crews to survey the properties, a clear act of intimidation. The looming shapes of excavators appeared on the streets bordering the neighborhood, their imposing metal frames like monsters lying in wait, ready to devour their homes as the residents watched with hearts constricted by anguish. Amid this escalating tension came the first small humiliation for the Titan. Elena was summoned to a private meeting with Montalvo's lead counsel, Dr. Gomez, in his ostentatious office. The space, filled with marble and leather, a study in excessive luxury, contrasted brutally with the humility of La Esperanza. Gomez, an impeccable man with a condescending smile, offered her a generous sum to abandon the fight and convince her neighbors to do the same. "Miss Elena," he said in a syrupy voice, "think of your future, your comfort. This is a lost battle. A little money now will save you a great deal of trouble later. There is no sense in clinging to a dusty old piece of paper. Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with an unbreakable dignity. She answered with a voice, clear and firm, that cut through the opulent air of the office. The future of my neighborhood has no price, Dr. Gomez, and our dignity is not for sale. That dusty old piece of paper is the truth. It is the history of my people, and it is stronger than all your gold. We will not yield. Tell Montalvo he doesn't have enough money in the world to buy the conscience of a united people. The lawyer, visibly vexed, merely tightened his lips, his arrogance wounded by her courage. The meeting ended with Elena's categorical rejection of both his offer and his veiled threat. She walked out of the building with her head held high. Rage burned in her heart, but it was forged with an unbreakable resolve that propelled her forward. That private humiliation had not weakened her. On the contrary, it had strengthened her, affirming her purpose. It confirmed they were on the right path, that Montalvo's fear of the truth was greater than she had imagined, that his arrogance was a fragile shield. They don't understand, she murmured to herself, feeling the sun on her face like a comforting balm after the coldness of Gomez's office, and the fear of confronting something so powerful and unscrupulous. We are not fighting for money. We are fighting for who we are. The next day, the press, firmly in Montalvo's pocket, launched its calculated media assault. A headline in the city's most prominent newspaper blared, "Ancient papers obstruct progress. La Esperanza neighborhood opposes urban development." The article portrayed Elena and the residents as a group of stubborn radicals clinging to fantasies of the past, refusing to accept the modernization the city so desperately needed. The words were poison, sowing doubt in the public mind and painting the vulnerable as the true villains of the story. A clear disinformation strategy that left them exposed, with no voice to defend themselves, no chance to reply. This was the second blow, the public one, the one intended to tarnish their reputation in the eyes of the world. The stares from strangers on the street, the dismissive comments, the feeling of being unjustly targeted by the press, it all weighed heavily on the residents, wounding their pride. Some felt demoralized. The shame of being portrayed as enemies of progress began to seep deep into their souls, undermining their resistance. "They're using us, Elena," said Doña Carmen, her eyes welling with tears. "They say we're an obstacle, that we don't want what's best for the city, that we're a burden." The media attack was a cruel tactic, designed to divide and conquer, to isolate La Esperanza from the sympathy of the rest of society, leaving them alone in their fight against a relentless giant. But though Elena felt the sting of injustice deep in her soul, she refused to let this new onslaught break them. She would not let despair take hold. She gathered the people in the plaza under the protective shade of the old tree. "This is what the powerful do when they are afraid," she told them, holding up the defamatory newspaper. Her eyes sparked with indignation. "They lie, they manipulate, they try to shame us, but we are not ashamed to fight for our land, for our history, for what is rightfully ours. The ones who should feel shame are those who want to steal what belongs to us. We are not obstacles. We are the memory of this city. We are the foundation of its history, and that cannot be bought or sold. It is defended with one's entire soul, with truth leading the way." Her passion resonated in their hearts. "So, what do we do?" Elena asked Lucia. her young voice filled with an indignation that mirrored everyone's. We can't let them slander us like this, paint us as the villains. We need the truth to come out. We need the rest of the city to know who Montalvo really is and why we are fighting. The true heart of our battle. Elena nodded, her mind already racing, searching for a way to counter the media attack, to turn their imposed narrative on its head. You're right, Lucia. We need our own voice, a loud speaker to tell our truth, unfiltered. Montalvo has his newspapers, but we have our dignity, we have reason, and above all, we have history on our side, and that is far more powerful than any lie. The community, under Elena's guidance, decided to organize a counter-protest, not just in La Esperanza, but in the city center, in front of the town hall, where everyone could see and hear them. They prepared banners with messages of dignity and justice, telling their side of the story, the truth Montalvo wanted to hide. Children, young people, and the elderly joined together, crafting signs, pouring their hearts into every word, every drawing, every letter, like an army of brave souls. It was a way to reclaim their narrative, to refuse to let Montalvo's be the only voice heard. They knew it would be risky, that the police might disperse them, but they felt it was their moral duty, their only option, their last hope. On the day of the demonstration, the city's main square, usually bustling with tourists and shoppers, filled with the colors and voices of La Esperanza. Elena stood at the forefront, the pact of La Esperanza held safely in a clear folder, protected from the wind and prying eyes. Her voice, amplified by a small megaphone, cut through the city air. We are not against progress, she cried out with all the force of her spirit, her voice vibrating with truth. We are against injustice. We are against being forgotten. This land is ours by right, by the blood and sweat of our ancestors. Mr. Montalvo wants to build his luxury on our ruins and our pain, on our broken dreams. The city dwellers, at first curious, began to listen intently, their indifference giving way. The stories of the elderly, their silent tears, the palpable indignation on every protester's face, began to touch the hearts of the passers-by. A small group of independent journalists, tipped off by an anonymous informant from La Esperanza, moved closer, their cameras recording every word, every banner, every gesture of pain and hope. The raw, emotional truth of La Esperanza was beginning to find its way through the cracks in the media wall Montalvo had built. People began to question the official narrative, to wonder if they were really seeing the whole story, to doubt what the newspapers had told them. As the demonstration gained momentum and hearts began to open, the police, under the implicit pressure of Montalvo and his connections, moved to disperse them. Please disperse this gathering. You do not have a permit for this protest, an officer said, his voice authoritative, trying to impose order. But Elena did not back down. Our permit is our dignity, officer, she replied firmly, standing her ground. Our permit is our history, our memory. We are not committing any crime. We are only asking for justice. This square belongs to everyone, and our voice has as much right to be heard as any other. Even if some powerful people don't like the uncomfortable truth we speak. The tension was high, but then the image of Doña Carmen, well into her 80s, raising a trembling fist and crying out, Justice, in her cracking voice, stirred something deep within the crowd. It even moved the police officers, despite their orders. The journalists captured it all. The incident went viral on social media, a spark that lit a wildfire. The story of La Esperanza began to resonate beyond the city's borders, reaching the ears of human rights organizations and pro bono lawyers. The tide was turning, slowly but inexorably. Montalvo could not control the anonymous people, transmitting the truth through their phones, a truth that could not be silenced. At the same time, despite their tireless efforts and legal trickery, Montalvo's lawyers failed to completely invalidate the Pact of La Esperanza. They discovered that while ancient, the document had been ratified on several occasions by local decrees and registered in notarial archives, giving it a surprising and unexpected legal force in the present day. The news infuriated Montalvo. "Incompetent fools!" he bellowed in his office, hurling a report against the wall. "I want you to find a way to silence that woman. Discredit her. Stop her. I will not be defeated by some penniless woman with a piece of paper. It's unacceptable." His rage was a storm threatening to destroy everything in its path. Sophia, his assistant, watched in silence. Her face remained impassive, but inside her, a small seed of doubt had begun to sprout, to grow with every new development. She had seen Montalvo crush many people, but Elena's persistence was different. There was a strength in her that money couldn't buy and threats couldn't break, an unshakable conviction. "Sir," she said cautiously, her voice barely a whisper, "perhaps it would be prudent to attempt a real negotiation, an offer they would consider fair, before this escalates further. Public opinion is not on our side right now, and the story of that document is gaining traction." Montalvo shot her a withering glare, deaf to reason. "To negotiate with them is to show weakness," he snarled, his voice a blade of ice that cut through the air. "My image as an invincible man cannot afford that luxury, that stain. I want a total legal siege. Exhaust their resources, bury them in endless complex appeals. Make them feel the weight of my power until it crushes them, until they understand that no one stands in my way. The judge will eventually tire of their arguments. Justice belongs to whoever has more money, Sophia. Never forget that. It's a game of power, and I always win, no matter the cost, no matter whose lives I have to crush to get what I want." The legal war began without mercy. Montalvo's lawyers filed dozens of lawsuits, appeals, and motions, attempting to drown La Esperanza in bureaucracy and legal fees, a relentless strategy of attrition. The neighborhood's resources were limited, and though they had the help of a few pro bono lawyers moved by their cause, the strain was immense. Residents had to attend hearings, submit documents, endure endless interrogations. Daily life became a constant legal battle, draining everyone's morale and energy, designed to make them surrender from sheer exhaustion. Elena, despite the weariness she felt in every bone, refused to falter. She spent hours with the lawyers, reviewing papers, preparing testimonies, searching for every detail. Her house had become the headquarters of the resistance, with maps, documents, and notes scattered everywhere in a kind of organized chaos of hope. "They cannot defeat us with exhaustion," she told her neighbors, her eyes sunken but still burning with an unyielding fire. "We have the truth on our side, and the truth, though slow, is the only thing that prevails. Every day we hold on is a victory. Every document we file is another step toward justice. We will not let their money steal our hope, not as long as we draw breath. One day, during a preliminary hearing, Elena suffered another humiliation. This one more subtle, but just as cutting, a personal attack. Montalvo's lawyer, Dr. Gomez, attempted to disqualify her as a witness, insinuating she was a manipulator, a charlatan leader who preyed on the naivety of the neighborhood's elderly. The hearing was public, and the eyes of those present judged her as the lawyer's sharp words sliced through the air. "This woman has no legal training," Gomez said, with a sneer of superiority. "She doesn't understand the complexity of the law. She is merely seeking notoriety at the expense of her gullible neighbors, out of pure ego." Elena maintained her composure. When she was given the floor, her voice, though trembling slightly at first with emotion, grew strong and resonant, filling the courtroom. "I do not have university degrees, counselor," she said, looking directly at Gomez, unwavering, without a hint of fear. "But I have the knowledge of a lifetime, the wisdom of my grandparents, and the truth of a century-old document. I understand what honor is, what a promise is, and what injustice is. My expertise is life in La Esperanza, and my motivation is love for my people. And that is more powerful than any legal code you can cite or any argument you can use. I am not here for notoriety. I am here for justice." Her words silenced the room. Even the judge, a stern man of few emotions, looked at her with renewed interest, a spark of admiration in his eyes. A frustrated Dr. Gomez tried to interrupt, but the judge gestured for him to be silent, indicating that he had heard enough. Elena, her dignity intact, had turned a humiliation into a moral victory, displaying the strength of ordinary people against the arrogance of power. The worst was yet to come. This battle had only just begun, and Elena's dignity was a beacon, illuminating the darkness of unchecked ambition, a silent cry that could not be ignored, for it was filled with truth. Upon hearing of Elena's small victory in the hearing, Montalvo felt his patience evaporate. His anger was a scorching fire consuming him, a mixture of frustration and uncontrollable contempt. "Forget the lawyers. I want real solutions. Do not tell me that an old piece of paper is going to halt a $500 million project," he ordered Sophia, his threatening tone chilling the air. "Hire the best publicists. Launch a massive campaign. I want La Esperanza to be seen as a nest of criminals, a public health hazard to the city. I want the public to hate them, to reject them, to turn their backs on them." The smear campaign arrived swiftly, with unprecedented virulence. Television ads, billboards, and paid articles in newspapers and on social media began to paint La Esperanza as a hotbed of social marginalization, a sanitary danger, and a resistance to progress, an undesirable place. They showed images of dilapidated houses, some even manipulated to heighten the effect, to reinforce the idea of an unviable neighborhood, a tumor that had to be excised for the good of the city. The contrast with the models of Montalvo's luxurious buildings was a brutal, calculated strike, designed to provoke disgust among the populace and ignite a polarized public debate. This massive media assault was a new tactic in their psychological war, an attempt to demoralize the residents, and sever any external support they might have gained. The people of La Esperanza felt the crushing weight of this toxic narrative, the shame of being publicly stigmatized, of being branded by lies. Some began to doubt, to wonder if they were truly fighting windmills, if public opinion, once poisoned, would turn completely against them. They began to fear the battle was already lost before it had even begun, for they no longer knew who to believe, no longer distinguished truth from deception. Helena, though exhausted by the incessant struggle, knew the answer to this campaign could not be purely legal. They could not hide in the courts. They had to win the war for the narrative, to reach the heart of the people, the very soul of the city. With the help of Lucia and other young people from the neighborhood, they created their own videos. Shot on mobile phones, they showed real life in La Esperanza: children playing, elders in the plaza, shared meals, the dignity of their homes, the community spirit that bound them together. These were authentic images, brimming with life and truth, a stark contrast to the cold, calculated propaganda of Montalvo. They were an appeal to humanity and empathy, a search for support. "Let us show them our truth, neighbors," Helena said at a meeting, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, but firm in its purpose, unwavering. "Let them see we are not criminals, that we are not a blight on this city, but good people. We are families. We are history. We are a community. We are the heartbeat of a neighborhood that refuses to die. Let them see our faces, hear our stories. Let them feel that we are people just like them, who also have a right to a decent home, to a future." That is our greatest weapon against their lies: the honesty of our hearts, the purity of our feelings, the beauty of a life they cannot hide. These homemade videos, raw with emotion and authenticity, blazed across social media, shared by outraged citizens and independent media outlets who dared to tell the truth. People began to see the other side of the coin, the truth behind the polished facade of Montalvo investments, behind the lies. The images of Helena embracing a weeping old woman, of children laughing in the streets of La Esperanza, struck a deep chord, awakening a powerful and unexpected wave of solidarity and empathy. The truth, though lacking the backing of major media, was cutting through with the force of raw emotion, touching countless hearts and minds. La Esperanza's media counteroffensive began to take effect, a reaction Montalvo had never anticipated. His smear campaign, which had once seemed all-powerful and unbeatable, began to lose credibility with every passing hour. The authentic images of life in the neighborhood resonated more deeply than the manipulated headlines and paid-for slander. Neighborhood organizations from other parts of the city declared their solidarity, offering their support, their aid, their voices. The battle for public opinion, which Montalvo had considered won, was slowly but surely turning against him, like a rising tide that threatened to sweep everything away, proving that ordinary people, when united, could make an extraordinary difference. The 30-day deadline, already extended by the endless litigation, was drawing inexorably closer, hanging over them like a sword of Damocles. The final date for the mass evictions, with or without a court ruling, had been set for 1 week away, an agonizingly short time. The tension in La Esperanza was palpable, a mixture of hope and fear, of determination and doubt. They had fought with courage, with all their strength. But Montalvo's power was still immense, and justice, at times, seemed blind to money, deaf to the cries of those who had little more than their faith. Their lawyers warned them, their faces grim. The judge is under enormous pressure. Montalvo has a great deal of influence, contacts who can tip the scales. We could lose this case if we don't present something irrefutable, something that leaves no room for doubt, something that cannot be manipulated. Uncertainty once again struck at the hearts of the residents. The pact of hope was strong, yes, but legal interpretation could be treacherous, easily twisted. They needed more, something so conclusive that no one could ignore it. An irrefutable proof that would silence every voice Montalvo could buy. Helena shut herself away again with the old document, poring over every word, every seal, searching for a detail, a clause, something they might have missed in their haste. The night grew long. Shadows danced on the walls of her humble home, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But she could not give up now, not when they were so close to the justice they so desperately craved. The responsibility for her people weighed on her shoulders, but so did the love she felt for every corner of La Esperanza, for every story, for every soul who had supported her, driving her to press on, to not falter. Suddenly, a minuscule detail on the back of the parchment caught her eye, a tiny ink smudge she had overlooked before. It was a barely legible annotation, written in the margins in a tiny script. It read, "For greater security, an identical and certified copy was deposited in the archive of the parish of San Miguel, along with the founder's will. A copy, a certified copy, kept in a sacred place, backed by faith." It was a double insurance, an ancestral precaution the Heredia family had taken to protect their pact from future ambitions. A new hope bloomed in her chest, a certainty that seized her, dispelling the darkness and fear. With the dawn, Helena ran to the parish of San Miguel, the same church where La Esperanza had celebrated baptisms, weddings, and funerals for generations, the sacred place that had witnessed their history. Old Father Anselmo, with his snow-white hair and gentle smile, received her with his usual warmth. "Father, I need to check the old archives," Helena said, her heart pounding, her voice thick with emotion. "We are looking for a document that could save our neighborhood, a copy of Don Rodrigo Heredia's will." Father Anselmo, who knew the neighborhood's history and Helena's character, nodded with a look of understanding and faith, knowing the importance of her mission. In the dusty parish archive, among record books and yellowed documents that smelled of the past, they found what they were looking for: a metal box with the church's seal engraved on its lid. Inside lay a parchment identical to the one Helena held, but this one also bore an ecclesiastical seal and the signature of a priest who had acted as a witness, a seal of undeniable authenticity. It was the certified copy, the irrefutable testimony, the second proof that solidified their case beyond all doubt. Emotion overwhelmed Helena. The truth, with its unshakable power, had come to light once more, despite years of neglect and Montalvo's greed. "We've done it, Father," she exclaimed, tears in her eyes, the parchment trembling in her hands. "We have the definitive proof. the will that revalidates the pact. Montalvo cannot deny this. He cannot escape the truth. Father Anselmo smiled, his wrinkled face filled with a serene peace and ancient wisdom. Faith and truth always find a way, my child, he said, placing a gentle hand on Helena's shoulder. Good men have always sought to protect their people. This document is the will of those who built this neighborhood with love and hope, with a vision for the future that never dies. News of the second document spread through La Esperanza like a whirlwind of fresh air. The neighborhood's morale soared to new heights. They didn't just have one document, they had two. And the second was backed by ecclesiastical authority, a fact that gave it an even greater, indisputable moral and legal weight. The people felt stronger, more united, more convinced than ever that their fight was not in vain, that justice, however delayed, was on their side. The fear of Montalvo's machine began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed determination and an unshakable faith in their cause. The presentation of the second document in court caused an unprecedented stir. Montalvo's lawyers, who had sneered at the old paper, were left speechless, the arrogance wiped clean from their faces. The judge, faced with incontrovertible evidence, had no choice but to recognize the legal validity of both documents. The courtroom, once filled with a formal silence, now echoed with an ancestral truth that was imposing itself upon modern greed. When Montalvo received the news, he erupted in an uncontrollable fury, his face crimson with rage. How is this possible? A second document? A parish? This is a conspiracy. I want you to investigate the priest. Find something, anything, to discredit him, to tarnish his name. His voice boomed through his office, his face a mask of frustration. The idea of being defeated by a humble neighborhood, by a pair of old papers, and a simple woman was an unbearable blow to his ego, a deep wound to his pride. Sophia this time could not hide her astonishment, nor her growing disillusionment. Helena's tenacity and the unexpected appearance of the second document had moved her deeply. "Sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet laced with genuine concern. "I think we have underestimated these people. Perhaps it is time to reconsider our strategy. This isn't just business. These are human lives, with their dreams and their histories. And the truth, sometimes, it has an unstoppable force. It cannot be bought or destroyed with money, because it resides in the hearts of the people, in their dignity." Montalvo shot her a withering glare, but Sophia's words had already planted a seed of doubt in his mind. The judge ruled that, given the weight of the irrefutable evidence, the case must go to trial. The date was set for 1 week later, precisely when Montalvo's final ultimatum expired. It was a race against time, a final duel between truth and unbridled ambition, between the dignity of a people and the avarice of a magnate. La Esperanza prepared for the definitive battle, the emotional climax that would decide its fate. The entire city watched, holding its breath, as the story of David and Goliath unfolded before their eyes. Helena felt exhausted, yet also infused with a supernatural strength, an energy that came from the depths of her being. A fire burned in her eyes that would not be extinguished until justice was served. "We cannot give in now, neighbors," she said, in the final meeting before the trial, her voice ringing with unshakable conviction. We have come too far. We have endured too much. We have unearthed the truth. Now we must shout it from the rooftops. Let the whole world know what Montalvo has tried to do. Let them see the dignity of our struggle. Victory is near. If we do not lose faith, if we keep our hearts united as one, strong and unbreakable, nothing can stand against us. The community of La Esperanza united as never before, prepared for the trial, their collective heart a drumbeat of hope and nervous anticipation. The neighborhood streets, once marked by anguish, now vibrated with a different energy, a mixture of tension and an indomitable faith. They knew the road had not been easy, that every step had been fraught with obstacles and humiliation, but each one had only strengthened their spirit. The fate of La Esperanza was about to be decided, and they were ready to face the truth in the arena of justice. Lucia, the young teacher, approached Helena with a look of admiration. I never thought a piece of old paper could have so much power, she said, her voice filled with emotion. But it is you, Helena, who gave it a voice. You brought it to life and turned it into a weapon for justice. Your strength has been the engine for all of this. Helena smiled, moved by the young woman's words. It is not me, Lucia. It is all of us. It is the unity of a people, the love for our land and our memories. That is what Montalvo will never understand, what all his money can never buy. Meanwhile, in Montalvo's luxurious office, the atmosphere was one of tense calm, the prelude to a storm. Ricardo, pale and jaw clenched, reviewed the reports from his lawyers again and again, searching for a crack, a loophole, a way out. The damning truth of the documents, the rising tide of support for La Esperanza, the toxic image his company was projecting to the public. It all gnawed at him from the inside. His invincibility, his aura of power, was being questioned for the first time, so publicly and so resoundingly, and he didn't know how to react, how to reverse the tide. From a distance, Sophia watched him. Her gaze was no longer impassive, but tinged with concern and a growing disillusionment with her boss's actions. She had witnessed Montalvo's cruelty on many occasions, in many business deals, but this time she felt he had crossed a line, an impassable moral barrier. Elena's fight wasn't for money, it was for principle, for the right to dignity for her people, and that was something that resonated in the deepest part of Sophia's own being. Montalvo's boundless ambition had not brought him peace, but a bitter struggle that he now seemed to be losing. Catching Sophia's stare, Montalvo shot her a furious look, brimming with resentment and contained rage. Don't look at me like that, Sophia, he hissed, his voice a cold, venomous whisper. I don't need your pity. I just need this to end, in my favor, with my victory. I want the lawyers to appeal to the highest court if necessary, to exhaust every last resource. I will not lose to that woman and her neighborhood of ghosts and illusions. My legacy, my name, my fortune, they are all at stake, and nothing can stop my victory, my destiny, my unshakable power. His declaration was a volatile mix of determination and desperation. The night before the trial was a long one in La Esperanza. Few could find sleep. Minds churned with thoughts. Nerves were frayed. But so too was the conviction that they had done everything possible, that they had fought with honor and with their hearts on their sleeves. Elena spent the final hours in silence, meditating, reviewing every moment, every word spoken, every effort made. She knew that the next day they would face a Goliath, a seemingly invincible enemy. But she also knew that David, with his sling and his faith, had achieved the impossible. And her people had the truth on their side, the most powerful weapon of all. In her mind, she relived the moment they found the second document, the light of hope on Father Anselmo's face, the glint of determination in the eyes of Lucia and Don Pepe. This was not just a legal trial, a clash of laws and arguments. It was a moral trial for an entire city, for society itself, a test of values. The hardest part was yet to come. The truth of hope is a torrent seeking its course, and no one can stop it. No matter how many try to silence it or divert it with falsehoods, the truth is what always prevails in the end, illuminating the path forward. The sun rose, painting the sky a vibrant red, promising a new day, a decisive day that would mark a before and an after. In La Esperanza, the neighbors gathered in the plaza, not with sadness, but with a solemnity charged with hope and a newfound strength. They walked together toward the tribunal, a tide of dignity and resistance, their steps echoing on the asphalt like a chant of faith, a silent hymn of unity. Elena walked at the front, her heart tight with emotion, but her head held high, ready for the final confrontation, for the battle of her life and of her people's lives. The courthouse doors swung open, and the people of La Esperanza entered, carrying with them not just documents, not just material evidence, but the memory of generations, the love for their land, the dignity of their history, the very soul of their neighborhood. Every face, every glance was a silent testament to their struggle, a voice crying out for justice. Montalvo and his team of lawyers were already waiting, a wall of power and arrogance, convinced of their victory. But this time, the scales of justice could tip in an unexpected direction, toward the side of the vulnerable, the dispossessed. The judge took his seat, and the courtroom, packed to the rafters with journalists and onlookers, fell into a tense, expectant silence. The air was thick with the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. It was the day of truth, the moment of the final confrontation. Helena looked at her neighbors, saw the glint of hope in their eyes, and felt an immense strength surge through her, a determination that made her feel invincible. The first voice to break the silence was that of Montalvo's lead counsel, Dr. Gomez, who began his argument with a practiced theatricality. Your Honor, we are faced with a crude manipulation of sentiment and a distortion of history. An ancient document, rescued from oblivion by people with clear personal interests, cannot prevail over the progress of this city and the right of a company to develop a vital project. This pact is a relic with no current legal value, a romantic fantasy that ignores modern laws of property and urban development. It is a desperate attempt by a group of people who refuse to move forward, to modernize, to accept the natural course of civilization's progress. His words, laden with disdain, echoed through the hall, seeking to sow doubt in every soul present. He continued with a series of complex legal arguments, attempting to invalidate the Pact of Hope, citing technicalities and legal loopholes in its wording. The residents of La Esperanza, seated in the pews, listened with furrowed brows, not fully understanding the legal jargon, but feeling the malice behind every word. Ricardo Montalvo, in his impeccable suit and a smirk of self-satisfaction, watched the scene from his seat, arms crossed, as if he were a spectator at a minor play. His cold, calculating gaze shifted from Elena to the judge, convinced that his money and influence were an unbreakable shield. To him, this was a mere formality, a small obstacle on the path to his inevitable victory. "This circus will be over soon," he whispered to his lawyer, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. When it was her turn, Elena rose, carrying the original parchment and the certified copy from the parish, both silent witnesses to the truth. Her voice, at first a murmur that grew in strength, filled the room with a genuine emotion that contrasted sharply with the coldness of Montalvo's lawyers. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not here to obstruct progress. We are here to defend justice, memory, and dignity. This document is not just an old piece of paper. It is an oath, a promise made generations ago, which guaranteed a home to those who built this city with their sweat. Can we, as a society, allow the ambition of one man to trample on the history of an entire people?" Her direct, powerful question resonated in the courtroom. She displayed both documents, simply explaining the history of the pact, how the Heredia family had safeguarded it, and how Father Anselmo's faith had protected the certified copy. "This double seal, Your Honor, is no coincidence," she affirmed, her voice vibrating with conviction. "It is proof that from the very beginning, the intent was to protect the people of La Esperanza from greed, from those who would one day try to take what is ours. It is the voice of our ancestors crying out for justice today, asking us not to let their sacrifice be in vain." The force of her testimony was undeniable. Her truth shone with its own light. The courtroom, moved by Elena's plea, fell into an expectant silence as the judge, after examining the documents with unwavering seriousness, frowned. He turned to Montalvo's lawyers with a look of deep concern. "Dr. Gomez," he said in a grave voice, "while Mrs. Elena's defense is emotional, no irrefutable proof has yet been provided to show that these documents, however old, have full validity in the current legal framework without some form of express ratification. Times change and laws evolve. We need more than good faith to annul a project of this magnitude." A pang of fear shot through the residents of La Esperanza. It was then that Ricardo Montalvo, unable to contain his arrogance, stood up, ignoring the bewildered and fearful glances of his own lawyers. With a sardonic smile, he addressed the court, his voice resonating with a glacial coldness. "Your Honor, with all due respect, sentimentalism has no place in business. This woman and her neighbors are clinging to old wives' tales, to fantasies of a past that no longer exists. La Esperanza is an obstacle, an eyesore that impedes the development of a modern, prosperous city. My project is the future. We cannot allow a handful of illusions to halt progress for thousands." The words were a direct blow, an attempt to humiliate Elena and her people. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at the faces of her neighbors, many of them elderly, their eyes clouded with humiliation at being called an eyesore, an obstacle. The hope they had fought so hard to ignite seemed to flicker. threatening to go out completely. The judge's voice, sharp with disgust at Montalvo's tirade, cut through the air. Mr. Montalvo, I will ask you to maintain decorum in this courtroom. This tribunal will evaluate the evidence, not personal opinions. But the damage was done. A murmur of resignation swept through the pews of La Esperanza. It seemed that, despite everything, Montalvo's power was invincible. The feeling of imminent defeat was crushing. In that moment of profound desolation, a subtle movement on Montalvo's side of the room drew every eye. Sophia, his assistant, who until then had remained impassive, rose to her feet with a slowness that betrayed an immense tension. Her face, pale, reflected a profound internal battle, a momentous decision. Montalvo glanced at her, an eyebrow raised, expecting a note or an instruction. But Sophia didn't look at him. Her gaze fell on Elena, then on the defeated faces of the elders of La Esperanza, and finally on the judge. Her eyes shone with an unexpected light, a determination she had never shown before. Your Honor, Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly at first, then steadying with a conviction that stunned everyone, including herself. I wish to testify. I have crucial information that has not yet been presented to this court. An absolute silence fell over the room. Montalvo shot to his feet, his face livid, his eyes bloodshot. Sophia, sit down. This is none of your business, he roared, trying to silence her. But the judge's voice, punctuated by the sharp crack of his gavel, interrupted him. Order in the court. Ma'am, you may approach the stand. The tension was palpable. Sophia walked to the witness stand, Montalvo's glare boring into her, but she no longer felt fear. The weight of the injustice, the dignity of Elena, the cruelty of her boss, it had all built up inside her until it finally burst. I have worked for Mr. Montalvo for 15 years, she began, her voice now clear and firm. I have witnessed his methods, his strategies. When the Pact of Hope appeared, he was informed of its existence and its possible validity, but he ignored it. He ordered his lawyers to discredit it at all costs, to find any loophole to nullify it, regardless of the truth or the lives affected by his ambition. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge, with an inquisitive look, urged her to continue. Mr. Montalvo, Sophia went on, her voice heavy with regret, but also with a new, liberating honesty, also ordered an escalation of the smear campaign against La Esperanza. He ordered the fabrication of false reports of unsanitary conditions, the manipulation of official records, and the use of friendly press to paint the neighborhood as a public danger. His goal was not progress. It was speculation. The lives of the residents never mattered. Only the value of the land for his luxury complexes mattered, for increasing his already immense fortune. He told me that justice belongs to the highest bidder, that no one would ever stand in his way. Each word was a dagger to Montalvo, an undeniable truth slipping through his fingers. Unhinged, Montalvo struggled to rise again, his face a mask of rage and panic. She's lying, he screamed. She's a traitor. She's been bought by that whore. But his lawyers held him down, their pleas for him to stop only adding to his humiliation. The mask of Ricardo Montalvo's invincibility had finally shattered, revealing the cold ambition and cruelty that seethed beneath. The courtroom was in shock. The press captured every gesture, every word, as camera flashes lit up his ruin. The final decisive blow had been struck by the most unexpected hand, a raw and painful truth that exposed the magnate's true, unscrupulous nature. Elena looked at Sophia, her eyes filled with immense gratitude and a profound understanding. The young assistant had found her own voice, her own dignity, in the most crucial of moments. Despite the personal risk, despite Montalvo's intimidation, she had chosen truth and justice over loyalty to a corrupt boss. Her testimony was the missing link, the final piece that solved the puzzle of injustice. It was an act of bravery that changed everything, backing Montalvo into a corner from which there was no escape. The scales had tipped definitively. The judge, his face grave, called a recess to deliberate. The tension in the room was immense, but it was no longer the tension of fear. It was one of anticipation, of a rising, shared confidence. The residents of La Esperanza embraced one another, their tears of anguish transforming into tears of relief and renewed hope. They had witnessed the fall of a giant, the power of truth in a world of lies. They knew that no matter what happened next, their struggle had been laid bare for all to see. They could no longer be silenced. After a tense wait, the judge returned. His face was serene, his voice firm and resonant. Considering the irrefutable authenticity of the covenant of hope and its certified copy, the evidence of its historical validity, and especially the crucial testimony of Miss Sophia, which reveals a clear intent of fraud and manipulation by Montalvo Investments and its president. This court rules in favor of the community of La Esperanza. The judge's words thundered through the room, a liberating decree that changed everything. An explosion of joy erupted. Shouts, applause, tears of happiness. The people of La Esperanza hugged and jumped, celebrating their victory with an overwhelming flood of emotion. Elena, her heart overflowing, embraced Don Pepe and Lucia. "We did it, neighbors," she cried out, her voice barely audible above the uproar, but filled with a pride that came from defending her people, her neighborhood, her history. "We did it." Justice, though long delayed, had finally triumphed. The judge continued, his voice steady amid the joyful chaos. An immediate halt is ordered on any and all eviction or demolition processes in the La Esperanza neighborhood. Furthermore, a full investigation into the business practices of Montalvo Investments is hereby opened, and an exemplary fine is imposed for attempted fraud and abuse of power. The dignity of a people cannot be trampled by boundless ambition. Pale and trembling, Montalvo could not bear the humiliation. He collapsed into his seat, his empire teetering, his name forever stained. In the mirror of truth, his public defeat was absolute, devastating. His image as an untouchable tycoon crumbled in an instant. Reporters swarmed him, shouting for a statement, but he could only manage incoherent babble, his face a twisted canvas of fury and despair. The powerful had fallen, humbled by the truth and the dignity of the vulnerable, by the strength of a united people who had refused to surrender. Meanwhile, Sophia left the courthouse, exhausted but filled with a serenity she had never known. Elena approached her, offering a sincere embrace. "Thank you, Sophia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. What you did took immense courage. You sacrificed so much for the truth. Sophia managed a faint smile. I couldn't be an accomplice to that injustice any longer, Elena. My conscience wouldn't allow it. Seeing you, seeing your people, I realized what truly matters, what has real value. In her eyes, the coldness of the corporate assistant was gone, replaced by the warmth of a person who had reclaimed her humanity, who had found her own path. News of the victory for La Esperanza spread through the city like a fresh, cleansing river. People poured into the streets, celebrating not just the triumph of a neighborhood, but the triumph of justice itself. In La Esperanza, the main square filled with music, laughter, and embraces. The air vibrated with renewed energy, with the certainty of a better, more just, more human future. It was a rebirth after the darkness of despair. Children ran freely, unaware of the legal complexities, but sensing the pure joy of their parents, the peace that had finally settled over their home. The old tree, a silent witness to so much sorrow and joy, seemed to sway its branches with more vigor, celebrating the victory of its people. Days after the trial, under the pressure of an outraged public, the city council issued an official decree. Not only did they recognize the full validity of the Covenant of Hope, but they declared the neighborhood a cultural and historical heritage site. This guaranteed the protection of their homes, their streets, their very way of life. It was a historic reparation, a balm for the wounds opened by fear. As part of the sentence, Montalvo Investments was forced to make a substantial donation to create the La Esperanza Foundation, an entity dedicated to defending vulnerable communities. Ricardo Montalvo himself was compelled to issue a public, televised apology. Though his words rang hollow, the act was an immense moral victory, the final humiliation of the powerful. Sophia, having left Montalvo's company on the day of the trial, found a new purpose. With help from Elena, she began working for an NGO, using her insider knowledge to protect others from predators like her former boss. She had found her peace, her redemption. Elena, the weaver of dreams who had stitched her community together with courage, was elected to preside over the new foundation. Her home, once a headquarters for the resistance, became its center of operations, a symbol of a fight that now transcended the borders of La Esperanza. In an emotional public ceremony, the square where it all began was officially renamed the Plaza of Dignity and Hope. A bronze plaque honored the founders and all who had fought. The original Covenant of Hope was donated to the city's historical archive, preserved as an invaluable treasure, the soul of La Esperanza, tangible proof that a promise made can withstand the ravages of time and greed. Lucia's small school received a major renovation, funded by the foundation, and a new community library was opened, the Library of Truth and Resistance. Don Pepe, his eyes filled with the wisdom of his 80-plus years, continued to be the guardian of the neighborhood's memory. Never forget what this land means, he would tell the children, sitting beneath the old tree in the plaza. It is more than bricks and mortar. It is our soul, our memories, our dignity. Always fight for what is just. Justice may be slow, but it always arrives for those who seek it with an honest heart. 5 years later, La Esperanza flourished as never before. The restored, vibrant facades of the homes reflected the joy and vitality of their inhabitants. The future was no longer a threat, but a brilliant promise, a blank canvas on which to build new dreams. They had shown that unity, truth, and dignity were weapons more powerful than money and influence. The Hope neighborhood had won, and with its victory, a message of justice had spread across the land, proving that no battle is truly lost when it is fought from the heart. The once fearful streets now pulsed with life. Children's laughter echoed where silence once reigned. Neighbors chatted animatedly on doorsteps, and families shared stories and dreams under the open sky. The La Esperanza Foundation had grown, extending its protection to other threatened communities. It became a model for social activism, a beacon of hope for all who fought against injustice, proving that the unity of ordinary people could indeed change the course of history. The Foundation's influence spurred significant changes in urban planning laws, implementing policies that prioritize the well-being of citizens over real estate speculation. The case of La Esperanza was now studied in universities, a testament to civil resistance and the power of historical documentation. The independent media outlets that had first given voice to the truth continued to cover the Foundation's work. They ensured that Elena's message of justice and dignity reached every corner of the country, inspiring countless others to raise their voices, to refuse silence, and to believe in the power of truth. Sophia, now a respected leader within the NGO, visited La Esperanza regularly. She was always welcomed as a redeemed hero. Her transformation was complete. The once impassive mask she wore had fallen away, replaced by a face that radiated deep peace and fulfillment. She had married an idealistic lawyer she met at the NGO, and together they continued their fight for social justice. "Thank you, Elena," she said during one visit, embracing her friend. "Thank you for showing me the way. Without you, I would still be in the dark, complicit in something that went against my own conscience, against who I truly am. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in dignity and in the positive impact we have on the lives of others, on the very soul of the people." Ricardo Montalvo, on the other hand, lost a great part of his fortune and all of his prestige. His name became synonymous with corruption and greed. His empire crumbled, his luxury projects stalled, and he faced a barrage of lawsuits for other irregularities unearthed by the investigation. He ended his days a recluse in his own mansion. Isolated, bitter, his once towering arrogance curdled into a cold, lonely silence. It was a gilded cage, a constant reminder not only of the money he had lost, but of his honor, his reputation, his very humanity. This was the final proof that justice, though it may be slow, always prevails, regardless of power or wealth. Elena, now with a few more silver strands in her hair and an even deeper wisdom in her eyes, watched from her balcony. She looked out over the bustling plaza, now shaded by leafy trees and dotted with wooden benches where neighbors shared the day. She saw Lucia, the teacher, laughing with her students, and Don Pepe, the old watchmaker, telling stories to the youngest children. There was no idyllic romance in her personal life, but her heart was full of a much greater love, the love for her community, for the family she had forged in the struggle. Her life was a testament that true happiness lies in service, in defending others, and in building a more just and humane world, selflessly. La Esperanza had become a living symbol of resilience, proof that the dignity of a people is unbreakable. Its streets told a story of overcoming adversity, a story of faith, a story of dreams defended with nothing but heart and truth as weapons. The final image settles on the plaza of dignity and hope. It is vibrant, alive with the sound of children playing around the newly restored fountain, their laughter echoing in the air. Above the doorway of the old community center, now the foundation's headquarters, a hand-painted phrase shone in the sun. This land is ours, by right and by love. A legacy of hope for all. Truth always prevails.